Today I'm out here in Los Angeles, and just before the show, Audi took the wraps off of the e-tron Sportback. This is the sporty styled version of their e-tron crossover. And if you take a look at it, it definitely looks like the regular e-tron, but there's some additional styling updates, some of which are unlikely, unfortunately, to come to America, like these really slim and sexy side view mirror cameras right here. There's a camera on the outside and an LCD on the inside. This completely replaces the side view mirror. Unfortunately, legislation in the US is a little bit behind the European Union, so we don't expect to see those in the final model. I also don't expect to see these absolutely cool digital matrix LED headlamps up front. Think of these sort of like a digital projector in your home theater or in some of those really expensive theaters out there. They digitize the light pattern up front and can project it in any pattern that they want to. Again, unlikely to come to America because of our laws in this country. Other than that, this looks very much like the rest of the Audi crossover lineup, except for this swooping profile back here that gives it perhaps a little bit more of a sedan-like look. So if you wanted a sedan, for instance, that was EV from Audi, you could look at this as that alternative, but it has all-wheel drive and it has more cargo room back here than you'd find in the typical Audi sedan, a little bit more like you'd find in a crossover. The overall shape is very much like the BMW X4 or perhaps the X6. Now, because the battery pack is laid very flat in the vehicle, we have a decent amount of storage underneath the load floor and what looks like the ability to put a spare tire back there if you were interested in doing that. Closing the power hatch, we also see this very distinctive tail lamp design right back here with the LED strip that runs from one side all the way across to the other. Obviously, the tail lamps are also going to be a little bit different by the time this makes it to the United States. Buried under the hood, we find one of the electric motors. This is a twin electric motor design. Power comes in at 355 horsepower or 402 horsepower when it's boosted in the sport mode. Now, because this is an electric vehicle, we do have a little bit of extra room under here, and that's where we find this very small frunk. It is just a little bit on the small side compared to some of the other electric vehicles out there, of course, most notably from Tesla, but it does have an area where you can store your chargers and charge cables, that sort of thing. Now, we don't have official EPA numbers for this vehicle yet. They tell us that on the European WLTP cycle, range should come in right around 277 miles. By the time this comes to America, the EPA is probably going to drop that down closer to 200, but we honestly don't know exactly where it will land. We also don't know anything about efficiency, but this is probably going to have a slightly longer range and slightly higher efficiency than the regular version of the Audi e-tron. We don't know any details about charging time specifically for the e-tron Sportback. It's likely going to be very similar to the rest of the e-tron lineup. One touch, however, that I really like is the fact that we now have two charging connectors in the e-tron. There's one over here on the passenger side. You'll notice this just has the level 2 and level 1 charging connectors. Since we're looking at European spec vehicles, this is the Menkes connector that is standard in Europe. It's a little bit different in America. There's a button right there to open and close that door. And then on the driver's side, we have what looks like an identical charging connector, but this is where we find the DC fast charge port. So if you pull into a DC fast charge station, you're going to plug it in on the driver's side, but if you pull into any other charging station, you have the choice of whether you want to charge on the passenger side or on the driver's side. That's a really handy feature that we see not just in this, but also Porsche's new EV. I hope that makes it to a number of other EVs out there soon. Overall, the driving position appears to be pretty consistent with the rest of the Audi crossover lineup. So even though this does look a little bit like a sedan on the outside, we have a more upright driving position and we're a little bit higher off the road as well. We do have a tilt telescopic steering column just as you'd expect in a modern Audi, and the dashboard layout and interior, which we're going to look at in a moment, is definitely modern and in keeping with the rest of the Audi lineup. Even though Audi has really dropped the roofline back here to give it this sexy sportback or coupe-like profile, headroom is still reasonably good in the back. I can sit upright in the back seat and my head is just barely touching the ceiling at 6 feet tall. If you have a lot of taller folks that you routinely carry in your crossover, you might want to get the regular version of the e-tron. The Sportback does sacrifice a little bit of practicality for the sexy exterior shape. Taking a quick look around the interior, we do have a panoramic moonroof in this model, extends to just over the rear passengers' heads. High-adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger. The seats this particular model are perforated. I assume they're ventilated, but I'm sure some of you will correct me down there in the comment section if I got that wrong. Moving over to the front doors, we find a very modern style, definitely in the theme of the rest of the Audi family, but a little bit unique for the e-tron. You can see right there the LCD screens for the side view mirror cameras. These are probably not going to make it to America. Unfortunately, legislation in America is a little bit behind the times, and that's mainly why we don't see some of these fancier features in our country. Moving over to the dashboard, we do find a mix of really high quality materials here. We have stitched leather on the upper section of the dashboard, some soft touch plastics above that. We find the latest Audi infotainment system. It's a touchscreen right here on the dashboard. In this system, the lower screen and the upper screen work in coordination with one another, although there are a few different functions on each screen. We'll take a deeper dive into that as soon as we can get our hands on one back home. Start-stop button right there. We have this very interesting shifter right here. This is sort of an armrest, and then the shifter is on the side, toggles forward and backward. Park is that button right there. Electric parking brake, and then we have this center console storage area where we have a sliding armrest. Some openable areas right there. Do expect to see cup holders by the time this makes it to America. This is also where we find the 2 USB inputs, some additional storage right there under that armrest as well. On the driver's side, there's a full LCD instrument cluster and then a steering wheel that looks very similar to the rest of the Audis in America. There are paddles on the back that allow you to control the regen braking. Audi has not told us what European pricing is going to be like or American pricing. However, they have said that you're going to be able to start pre-ordering this very, very soon, likely by the end of November, possibly by the end of December. So be sure and stay tuned for details from Audi on when you can place your order for the e-tron Sportback. When taking a look at the overall range and efficiency numbers in the e-tron, it's important to remember that this has very, very wide tires. 255s are standard. All the ones we've been looking at today have 265 width tires on them, and these are Eagle F1 performance tires. So these are much stickier and much higher resistance tires than we find in something like a Tesla Model 3 or a Tesla Model Y or an S or an X or anything along those lines. So obviously range is going to be reduced notably by that. We also see something very similar in the all-new Ford Mustang Mach-E, because that has wide tires in that GT model, and that's why it gets lower range than the rest of the Mustang Mach-E lineup. So expect this to again come in between about 200, maybe about 240 miles of overall EPA range, and overall efficiency numbers definitely a little bit lower than the competition. On the flip side, this is probably going to be one of the best handling EVs that we have out there in America. Be sure and stay tuned for news, reviews, and more, and we will get you a full review just as soon as we can possibly get our hands on the Audi e-tron. We should have the regular version of the e-tron in for a full review coming up in January of 2020, so be sure and stay tuned for that. Also check out the rest of our videos from the LA Auto Show out here. Find us over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so, and I'll see you next week.